I think last time Graham just went on like a 15-minute
Oh my god.
monologue, and I don't even know where we ended up with that. Mike here, as always, but no Graham this month. He's busy. He's triple booked this month. We got a lot of work going on, but instead, I'm actually really excited because I have a good friend of mine, Cody. He is a principal sales engineer at Corelight, and this one's going to be fun because he works on the other side of the coin. So where I do all the offensive work, he helps companies on the defensive side, and I think we're going to be talking about some really interesting things about that. So, Cody, thanks for joining. Good to
Thanks
see
for
you.
having me.
I like the shirt, by the way. Guardians of the Network. Corelight
Appreciate
has
it.
the best shirts, by the way. If you're ever at one of these events, like go see their booths. They have the sickest shirts. I have, I think, all of them at this point, but yeah, they're the best. I'm rocking a DEF CON 21 shirt, so throwing it back a little bit. 12, 13 years old now. I try to swap it out each episode for something new. So 21. What was your first DEF CON? Do you remember?
That's going back probably 2016 or 2017,
Okay,
before COVID.
before COVID. So it's somewhere in the 20s then.
Yeah.
Got it. So, Cody, I've been wanting to talk to you about this because there's a lot that I think people can learn on the defensive side of things. So, like for instance, at Meltec, we break into companies for a living. Like that's what we're doing all the time. And one of the things that we always try and talk about with our customers is, do you have defenses in place? And
Mhm.
then let us know what you see when we're doing this testing so that we can evaluate if that stuff's working, right? So it's like, think that of like your house, and you buy
Mhm.
this alarm system and you spend a ton of money on it to make sure that it goes off when you have intruders, but then it doesn't ever work, right? There's just no real value that you're getting out of it for all the money that you're spending. And for companies, like we see that on almost all of our engagements.
Mhm.
So, I mean, is that surprising to you from that? I mean, what's your thoughts?
A better question to ask would likely be not do you have defenses in place, but are you leveraging defenses in place? Because I have a slew of customers that come to mind today, both in my current life and my previous life, of customers that they would say, yeah, I have defensive capabilities in place today, but they're not using them because it's an audit checkbox, right? So purchasing, whether it's a solution or a service, whatever, is different than using it. If you bought it just because you failed an audit or failed some test and you said, okay, I'm secured now, that's very different than saying, I got this thing and my team is trained to use it effectively, regardless if that's your team in house or out
Mhm.
of pocket, right? If you're contracting that type of stuff out.
Now, can you break down a little bit for us the difference between some of the defenses that corporations or companies might implement? I know there's a lot of acronyms that are out there. There's, MDR, EDR,
Yeah.
NDR, XDR. I mean,
Yeah. So
what do we got?
without jumping into buzzword bingo or acronym soup, because there's just so many and they seem to rotate every single year, right? I would start with what we call the SOC Triad. There's a few different variations of that word out there as well, but SOC Triad tends to be what we go with because that's what Gartner coined, I don't know, almost a decade ago, if not more. But that basically talks about like you have 3 points on a triangle. At the top of that triangle, we have our SIEM, which is going to be what's collecting all of our logs, right? So that logging data telemetry. That's going to be the first point. We want to collect the logs from as many devices on our network as possible, our environment as possible. And then you go into the third point or second point. That's going to be your endpoint detection and response, your EDR. You see that in the news today, whether it's for shutting down half the planet or for defensive purposes, right? But that's going to be all of your endpoint telemetry. That's going to be what's running on your individual hosts, your workstations, your servers, etc. That's going to be like stuff at the process level. And then you have your network detection and response. This is where Corelight comes in and where we really shine. So that's going to be all of the metadata and data surrounding your network. So what types of protocols are on your network? How are devices communicating? Are the devices communicating, talking over typical protocols, standard protocols? Is there something new communicating that wasn't there last week? All right, so the concept there with all three of those points of the triangle, when we get through the SOC triad, theoretically, you have 100% visibility.
Mm.
The way I look at security is whether you're on the business side or the practitioner side, you're always asking and answering questions. The questions will change, but you still have to answer them, right? Whether it's how does this impact my business, or how does threat X impact server B, right? Are we
Mhm.
vulnerable to X? All of those questions and answers help fuel your visibility. So in theory, if you have 100% of everything, you can answer every question. In reality, nobody has 100% visibility into anything. So the
Mm.
whole concept there is when you get to a point where you can't answer a question, that's when you start to dive into that SOC Triad to figure out, okay, which one of these helps me answer that question. There's a ton of other technologies out there, like we could talk about SOARs, for example, which is more so about the automation, playbook creation to orchestrate response and automate various things within security and IT. MDR, managed detection and response, I'm sure we'll talk about quite a bit today. That's when you pay someone to effectively manage some of that stuff for you. But yeah, I probably went on at least 3 tangents there. But.
No, that's fine. That does help though from my perspective, because when I'm talking to companies after we do an engagement and we ask them like, hey, what did you see? Like, were there any alerts? Did your outsourced IT or your outsourced security management, did they see anything? And the answer often is just no, we didn't see anything at all.
Mm-hmm.
I don't necessarily always know like how to help them fix that problem, because well, it seems like they're missing some parts of that triad
Yeah.
in order to catch what we're doing. Because like with, I don't know, with pen tests, we're not trying to be covert, right? We're
Yeah.
just trying to find the vulnerabilities, we're trying to exploit them, and then help guide them to being more secure.
Yeah.
And from my perspective, that defensive network component is like a huge part of that. And if most of these companies are missing out or missing these alerts, I mean, what would cause something like that?
Yeah. So the networking side is unique in that you might not log everything, right? If you attack something as a pen tester, there's a chance that the thing that you attacked might not be sending logs, or the thing you attacked might not have an EDR agent on it, so it's not reporting any telemetry because the agent doesn't exist.
Mm.
There, to my knowledge, and someone in here can probably correct me if I'm wrong, there has not been an attack where you successfully breach something without crossing a network boundary of some sort. Whether you're doing lateral movement, whether you're going in through like the perimeter, you have to cross a network. So if you're effectively monitoring the network, then you are effectively seeing something, right? Whereas the other 2 triads have a different percentage of whether or not they can fail. Fail is probably a bad word, but maybe just not be successful.
Mm-hmm.
So when you start diving into, hey, did you see this? No, I didn't see it. A good question there would probably to start breaking down, well, where is the data that would let them see it? If you pop a web server, for example, right? That's a really good use case for looking at network data. You can see via like HTTP headers, or even SSL certs, like tools love to say, hey, I'm a tool.
Mm-hmm.
Especially the things that are open source because they don't want to get sued into oblivion, right? So they love to broadcast somewhere in their protocols, hey, I'm a tool, and we can pick that up very easily on the network side. Um, Whereas, like maybe you're doing privilege escalation, that's not a network focused
Sure.
tactic or technique, right? But that would be something that shines up really, really well in an EDR because you'd see that privilege escalation. You might see command line arguments. You might see new processes being created that never leave that host and therefore don't touch the network. Same thing with logging, right? If you're collecting logs from it, then maybe you get a little bit of insight that might point us to the EDR or the NDR solutions. So again, I'm kind of going off a tangent here, but I think the better approach in that scenario is not so much, hey, did you see it? But maybe, hey, we did X. This type of data would live in Y. Are you leveraging something like Y, right? Are you collecting logs from this host? Do you have an endpoint agent on this host? Are you monitoring the traffic that goes to and from that host? And that might at least give you a little bit more insight into if they didn't see it, why they didn't see it. Because if all 3 of those things are false, right? We're not monitoring the network. We don't have an agent. We're not collecting logs. Yeah, no wonder they didn't see it.
Sure. Okay. That helps a lot, because for me it seems almost like there would just be one thing that they're doing wrong. But I mean,
Mhm.
based on what you're saying there, it's could be multiple things that they're missing depending on the types of activities that
Sure.
we're doing. So that I think that's going to help just a ton for me going forward. When I have these briefings
Mhm.
with customers to say like, hey, you didn't see anything, but more specifically, we can point them a little bit more towards you didn't see when we did Privesc on, host A, or we did a brute force
Yeah.
attack or a password spray on the domain. It can at least help them narrow down that search a little bit
Sure.
to see where those blind spots were
Yeah.
and maybe more effectively figure out an approach to address that moving forward.
And on that topic as well, I have a customer that just came to mind. Obviously, won't say them out loud, but just a couple months ago, they went through a red team engagement through their EDR vendor, and we're their NDR vendor. And just through our meeting, we didn't ask; it just came up naturally in conversation. They're like, "Oh yeah, that so and so person's part of the red team engagement right now." And we were like, "Well, wait a second. We are one of your defensive vendors, right? Can we get the copy of that report?" They hadn't thought about sharing that report
Mm,
with their defense vendors. It was like a new concept. And we're like, well, if you give us the report, we can see where, not necessarily that we failed, but maybe that we can increase visibility so you can catch that the next time. Or maybe it's a matter of, hey, this alert didn't fire because it's turned off in the environment. With that report, the defensive vendors can then take a look at it and say, oh, we can improve as well. So it doesn't just fall on the customer.
oh, interesting. Okay. Yeah, I don't know that we've ever had that discussion with a customer where they shared that report back. I'm often, so we're working with a lot of small organizations, and with these small orgs, a lot of times they're having their IT or their security or any of that
Yeah.
stuff like outsourced because obviously it's expensive. You need the personnel, you need the budget, the technology.
Yeah.
So they'll hire an outside company that basically says, "Hey, we're gonna handle all this stuff for you, and we're also going to be doing all of your security monitoring, right?
Sure.
So maintain all of your systems, maintain your security. You should be all set." What I've also seen is that there are organizations that'll do all that, and then they'll say, "Hey, we'll also do an evaluation of the security to see where those holes are."
Mhm.
And for me, that seems like a conflict of interest in some ways because if you're in charge of maintaining the security of a customer, can you effectively like validate that security unbiased, right? Can you
Mhm.
can you have that objective view of things, or is it like more appropriate for an outside review, an outside set of eyes? Like my opinion, it's having somebody else that's not associated with who's managing your defense or your IT to come in and do that evaluation to make sure that uh, that those things are being done correctly and that there's not this like, oh, we're not going to talk
Mhm.
about those things that that we know about there. I don't know, what's do you have any thought on that
Yeah,
one?
I mean, first and foremost, it's all always a little coincidental when the gap analysis aligns with the new product being pushed by sales from the various service vendors, right? So that's always something to look out for, right? If you always want, in my opinion, a third party review of those types of things. Like always go through the service. If you have a trusted service provider that you love to use, awesome. Um, but I generally recommend having a different service evaluate what you need.
Mm,
All right, because if the same person that's telling you what you need is also the person always selling you what you need or telling you where their gaps are and it always aligns exactly with what they need, there might be some bias in there. It's hard to tell, right? Everything in this field tends to be relationship based. There's some slimy people out there, there's some really good rock stars out there, right? And the same thing goes with cybersecurity vendors, right? All the time, customers will come to us and say, hey, we're thinking about monitoring X. And we'll say, truthfully, like, yeah, if you monitor X, you get X, Y, and Z out of that new data. Or, hey, that's going to be a high cost in something. Are you sure you want to go down that approach? It's almost a good vendor or services partner should take a consultative approach to your security, right? It should never be a, hey, here's what you need to do. You need to do it this way.
mm.
That aligns with the sales goal, right? It should always be, hey, if you do X, here's the benefits. If you do Y, here's the benefits. The choice is yours. We can support you either way, right? Whatever makes the most sense for them.
I love hearing like the inside scoop from somebody that bridges that gap between the technical and the sales because like as like a business owner, I'm always getting those sales calls and it's
Mhm.
always hard to like filter through the things that are like good to hear versus the things that like might actually really benefit me as like a business owner. So I just appreciate that side of it too.
Yeah, I mean, it's a small knit community, right? If the people that tend to sell snake oil will eventually get found out to sell snake oil. It's always easier to just be honest and upfront as you go about the process.
So I want to move on a little bit because there's some other interesting things that you do. But before we dive into that, like just to preamble it a little bit, I want to talk about threat hunting. So can you give us just like a brief description of threat hunting for anybody that's not really familiar with it?
Oh man, that's a trigger word. And so many tangents will come out of that. When we talk about threat hunting, when you hear it at an industry conference, I'll start there, it could mean 7 different things.
Okay.
If you talk to a practitioner, it's generally all the same thing, meaning we have a human behind the keyboard proactively, that's probably the important word there, proactively looking through data sets, trying to find anomalies in data, whether that's, again, SIEM, your EDR, your NDR, whether it's, wow, Jimmy lives in New York but logged in at 3 in the morning, right? There might not be an alert for that. Threat hunters are the proactive approach to identifying risk to a business in a data perspective, right? There's a whole other conversation about GRC and risk and compliance that we're not going to go down because threat hunters really don't have anything to do with GRC per se. I'll preface that with an asterisk for those watching. But when we talk about threat hunting in our circles, that generally applies to the human that has been tasked with trying to find things that the alerts miss, right? It's a human proactive approach. And the reason I say it that way is when you go out in the industry, you go to a conference, you're going to hear a lot of things like automated threat hunting. Well, if it's automated, then you're probably going to get into some buzzword bingo conversation around AI, and AI is great, it's a fantastic tool, but it is not a human replacement, right? So again, to answer your question, when we talk about threat hunting, it's simply trying to identify something in data that a robot might miss.
So if we go back to that original point that I made at the beginning of the alarm system in your house, right? You're installing that, you're trying to prevent somebody from breaking in.
Yeah.
So on the threat hunting side, is the assumption more that there might already be somebody in the house, the alarm didn't go off, and now we're going to go searching to see if there's anything weird going on that could indicate that somebody's there?
Sure. So alarm system in the house, right? A lot of modern alarm systems have like motion sensors on windows, for example. Let's use that analogy. Well, there's nobody that's 16 foot tall. We put motion sensors on all of our windows on the first floor. We must be protected. The alarm system will tell us if someone climbs through those windows. A threat hunter is going to look at that and say, and actually to preface that, a threat hunter, we typically work off of a hypothesis-based approach where we want to ask and answer questions. We want to ask a question and then prove that question true or false based off of the data available to us. In the alarm system, in the house example, right, we could say, well, sure, all of the windows have motion sensors on them, but none of our second story windows have motion sensors on them. What happens if somebody has a ladder? Could they open those windows and get to the second floor? And then as threat hunters, we'd say, yeah, there's no motion sensor here, and I can put a ladder to that window. That might be something I want to identify. It doesn't necessarily mean something bad has happened, but threat hunting isn't just about identifying bad. 9 out of 10 times when I'm threat hunting, I'm finding a misconfiguration, not malicious behavior. This goes into a whole conversation around like enablers of compromise versus behaviors of compromise, and we can touch on that more if you want. But in this case, as a threat hunter, I'd say, hey, we don't really have visibility if someone opens a second story window. Someone could open a second story window with these parameters, getting the ladder, and we think the company should know about that. And we're going to, if we go up there and realize, oh, the window's been opened, we'll make an incident out of it proactively. There's no alert because we didn't have a motion sensor there. But if the window's not open, we'll say, hey, someone could open this, and we'll document it and decide what the business wants to do.
That sounds just like so much overlap with what I'm doing because I'm making those same assumptions like, hey, there's second floor windows there. I'm going to try and break into those as that person with that offensive knowledge. So it almost seems like you're doing some of that same stuff because I'm looking for misconfigurations. I'm looking to break in those holes, but you're not going that next step of actually demonstrating it and showing that impact, but just the fact that it exists and that you found it. Is that, I mean,
Yeah, so there's definitely a lot of overlap there. I think the main difference is there's always a huge overlap with offensive security and defensive security. To adequately defend an environment, you have to think, how would somebody break into my environment? To do that, you have to think in terms of offensive security. What would a bad guy do here, right? In that particular case, an offensive, you'd say, hey, I can open this window. I can get a ladder and I can open the window. A threat hunter or a defensive analyst might say, hey, I think we can open that window, but I don't have any data to tell me when that window is opened. Therefore, I have a visibility gap. Your report's going to say, I opened the window. Their report's going to say, hey, this window could be opened, and I don't have a way of telling when it's opened. Right? And that's really where that gap starts to close, is now you can see, oh, it can be opened, and we don't know about it. We should fix that and put a motion sensor on the window. That's the piece where defensive is going to come in and say, we should put this thing here.
Okay. Man, this is awesome. I love hearing about this because this is super helpful, I think, for organizations to kind of figure out like what's going to be best for them. But now I'm trying to think of what I had a thought while you were doing that, and of course it blanked on me just in the moment here. But with the threat hunting itself, I'm trying to determine. Let's see here. For organizations, it seems like threat hunting you'd have to be really knowledgeable about the organization itself, right? It's not like you could just be a generic threat hunter that can just understand all these things for a multitude of different customers potentially, unless maybe they're the same type of environment or whatever. But to me, it seems like it really has to be this person that has a lot of knowledge about the organization, the network, the rules, the risks, those types of things, in order to actually like be effective at doing that. So like how can somebody take advantage of something like that without maybe having the resources? Are there ways to protect against that without having a dedicated person? Do you know of anything there?
I mean, you could go down the services route where if you don't have personnel or resources available to do that type of work, that's when you start to get in like the MDR conversation. And I think that probably brings us more to a conversation about what to look for in MDRs.
Okay, yeah.
But also on top of that, it tends to be your more senior people that become threat hunters. When you get into like a SOC, Security Operations Center, it tends to be larger organizations that even have a dedicated SOC. Generally, more so with probably like the customers of size that we're talking about here today, you probably have a couple guys in IT or women and making like, they're wearing a bunch of hats. They're the IT admin, they're the network admin, they're the security architect. Like they're doing all those jobs under one hat. It probably makes more sense to have a discussion with them around what knowledge can you pass on to a new hire. It's the senior people that generally have to trickle that knowledge down to the new hires, and that's how you start to build a security operations center. But again, that goes down to the whole conversation of, can you afford a security operations center at your scale? If not, you still need to protect yourself, and that's when we start to get into the MDR service. I would say you don't necessarily need, put a little asterisk in here for anyone who wants to fight me after this. You don't necessarily need to be an expert in your environment to do threat hunting.
Okay.
Threat hunting is just hypothesis testing. Can someone open the window? Yes, they can. How would they open the window? Do I have the data to tell when someone opens the window? Right?
Got it.
That's all threat hunting really boils down to be. And there's a lot of repetition in that. When we look at network protocols, well, with things like HTTP, we know how that protocol is supposed to look. We know how, if an end user visits a website, how that looks. So we can still, even if we're not familiar with the environment, identify anomalies to what a normal protocol is. That doesn't mean we found bad. It doesn't even necessarily mean we found a misconfiguration. But as someone who doesn't know the environment, we can still walk in and point out, hey, with a fresh set of eyes, this looks weird to me. Right?
Okay.
Generally with a more, I hate using the word mature, but generally with a SOC that's grown out and you have a more senior person in a dedicated threat hunting role, that person is typically someone who is an expert in the environment. They know Windows 2003 is running in a closet on floor 2, right?
Right.
And they know what to look for it. They know that it's monitored. Um, though that's experience that comes with time of being with an organization. And we see that less and less today, especially after COVID and during COVID, of that expertise existing for long periods of time. Ideally, with service providers, you get dedicated resources that just work with you and maybe a couple of other accounts.
Hmm.
So over time, they build up that knowledge, right?
Okay, so it does seem like it is possible for
It
them to
is.
get fairly familiar enough to spread the cost across multiple organizations
Yeah.
to have some of that stuff in place without
Even
it.
even outside of service providers, like security vendors, for example, we
Hmm.
have something called resident engineers. That those resident engineers might be dedicated to certain accounts. They might, depending on what the workload is required for the accounts, they might have 3 or 4 accounts, but they're dedicated to that same handful. So over the span of a year, 2 years, they understand those accounts deeply, and a lot of vendors offer resident engineers. So you can have dedicated security resources, but then same concept with like service vendors for MDRs and stuff.
Hmm. Okay, that's okay. That helps a lot, especially with recommendations, because to me, the experience has always been. I mean, I just had a call with a customer that we did a test for the other day. They're like, "Yep, all of our stuff is outsourced." We let them know that there's going to be testing. We didn't set it up for like any sort of allow listing, anything like that. We really want to see what they're able to catch. And then, we did the testing. We reached out throughout the week and we said, "Hey, we started doing some scanning." It was all external testing, perimeter testing. We did some scanning, we did some enumeration, we did some potential vulnerability analysis. I was like, "What have you seen so far?" And they said, "Nothing."
Hmm.
I said, "Okay, we're going to ramp this up because we want to see where that threshold is
Yeah.
for what they're going to do." And we just got more and more and more aggressive. And then at the end of the week, we said, "Okay, what did you got?" And they're like, "Yeah, still, we're just
I
whole
have
big goose egg."
personally been put into some awkward conversations, and same type of scenario. I go to a customer and they say, oh, we're in the middle of a red team exam or pen test, audit, whatever, and our MDR service is watching this. So they'll tell you, like, they'll tell us if they see anything, and they'll come back to us and say, hey, they're not seeing anything. Something's wrong with your product. And we'll go in and say, we can see it, right? We can look for the data. And we've had some pretty interesting, awkward conversations where obviously we can't say service X isn't giving you what you need.
Hmm.
We have to be a little bit more political than that. But there are certainly some circumstances where we can say, hey, maybe we should review the configuration
Hmm.
with that service provider because for whatever reason, we can see things are firing and maybe they're not telling you about it. So we can be
Hmm.
a little bit more tactful, but there's definitely some awkward conversations that come up where companies learn the hard way that maybe they're not getting the service they're paying for.
Yeah, that's my what I've noticed is that they
Hmm.
seem like they're protected, but until they get that evaluation from, like us, or if they have a red team, or if they have, some other outside service doing pen testing or whatever, they just have no idea that there's no problems, because it's like, hey, no alerts means no problems, right? And we haven't had any breach, and we haven't had any reason to suspect there's a breach, so all the stuff that we're investing in must be good.
Hmm.
And then, folks like us come in and we, get all everywhere in the network, get access to all these things, and basically like what Graham was talking about last episode, even to the point of getting personal uh, access to personal files, personal credentials, and those types of things, and then just them being completely blindsided with
Yep.
those results.
That brings up a good memory of, good's a strong word, a bad memory. A colleague and I, another person that you know, who I won't name for this, him and I jointly responded to an incident for a defense contractor a few years back. And U.S. defense contractor building stuff for the military, the classic story there. And there was a ransomware incident, and they had a managed service, an MDR provider that also acted as an MSSP. They
Mhm.
managed all the infrastructure and then provided services on top of it to look through the infrastructure. And every week that customer got a report saying, hey, here's what we identified, here's the alerts and all that. Because the customer, while the defense contractor, was growing out their security team. They didn't have the resources to have 24/7 support. And that's probably a good thing to mention as well, is services help augment that 24/7
Mhm.
requirement, right? Even if you've built out a team, if your team isn't doing 24/7, you might still want services to augment that a little bit, right? Anyways, digress there. We were at this contractor. I was remote. My colleague was on site, and we were responding. And the first thing we looked at, they had a solution at the time that did EDR, NDR, SIEM all together. And we learned very quickly that the EDR portion of that solution had been broken for months. And
Oh,
the service provider who was supposed to be managing that also jointly responded to the incident with us and kind of scratched their head because they're like, well, wait a second. We're supposed to be fixing this.
oh, Jesus.
So it turned like that Spider-Man meme where
Yeah.
everyone's pointing at each other, right? But, that was a really good eye-opener of, hey, this provider is giving you a false sense of security every week. You have a report that says you're okay, but then next week you're responding to ransomware costing in the tunes of millions per day in lost revenue. And the main problem here is that the provider gave them a report, but wasn't actually doing the work to supplement that report. And I'm not saying all MDR providers are bad or anything like that. A lot of them are actually really good and really help solve the augmentation problem.
Mhm.
But when you're looking at MDR providers, that goes back to, well, cool, you're going to hand me a report. What are you doing outside of that report? What is your schedule for proactive hunting? Are you just reactive? Like if an alert bubbles up, you give me a report on that? Or are you
Mhm.
proactively looking at the data too? And a provider that is more proactive is probably going to have a better success rate, in my opinion. What could have been a very quick incident response took the span of 2 weeks
Oh,
and
wow.
like 20, $30 million of lost revenue.
Yikes.
Probably, yeah, it was a bad time. Negative note to end that story on, but definitely a lesson learned and something we now bring to our customers of maybe, you know, we can be consultative and we saw this in the field. Don't fall on this trap.
Hmm. No, it brings up a good point too on the uh, supplemental services to help things, because from an attacker's mindset, I'm always thinking about like, hey, this place operates, general 9 to 5.
Hmm.
So if I wanted to start getting away with things, I would want to wait until after hours because nobody's in the office, nobody's
Hmm.
able to, keep an eye on this stuff. And that's when I can start, leveraging the access that I have to move around. And unless you have something like that with like the 24/7
Yeah.
evaluation, those types of things, like you're setting yourself up for having to reactively handle an incident or a potential incident because you don't have the ability to basically pay somebody, I guess, for
Yeah.
to watch all this stuff all the time.
And like on that note, there's a lot of alerts out there that just exist with various tools that people aren't aware of. So that's a really good example of, going back to Jimmy, works 9 to 5, logging in at 2 a.m. Microsoft, for example, has a really good alert with Office 365. So many customers today use Office 365.
Oh yeah.
Native, you don't have to flip anything on. And in Active Directory Online, it'll alert you saying, hey, this is an impossible travel based off of the time that this person signed off or last signed in, and the next sign in being in a completely different company or a different country. Microsoft will actually track, like, it takes more than 8 hours to get there. That's probably not Jimmy, right? But that data doesn't go anywhere by default. You have to configure it to send to a thing to look at it.
Oh
And a
wow.
lot of companies aren't aware of that. And then the follow up to that is, okay, if somebody has Jimmy's credentials and they sign into something on the network at 2 a.m., then now you have a network level event. You have a log, you have a network level event. They sign into a server. Okay, now you have an EDR event. Right? You can start to correlate all this data together to build the case of, well, that's weird. Jimmy works 9 to 5 and he touched a whole lot of things at 2 a.m.
Sure. Damn, I didn't realize that stuff was built right into like O365.
Oh, yeah, and it's been there for like a decade.
Do you know, and this is just a question I don't even know. What about if with O365, obviously you can
Hmm.
access things when you're inside the network.
Sure.
You're at the office, everybody's using, O365 to log into their systems and access their files. Do you know if there's any alerting or flagging or anything like that if they're logged in and then an authentication attempt comes from outside?
I don't know offhand. They built out a whole library of alerts specific to user sign-ins. And then the problem with it, or the problem at the time, I don't know if it's improved in the last few
Yeah.
years, was that you had to look in the Azure AD console
Hmm.
to even see those alerts existed. Now with all the SIMs out there and Sentinel, for example, that's probably easier to get. But if that alert were to exist, it's probably in that place, and unless it's configured to go somewhere, it's probably sitting there.
Yeah, I'm really just curious on it because like one of the things that we do for all of our externals
Hmm.
is we're going to first, target the company that we're testing. We're going to figure out what their format is for their account authentication process, right? We're disregarding MFA for the moment, but say it's like, first name dot last name at
Yeah.
acmecorp.com or whatever. So we're going to enumerate as many of those people as we can because that's easy to do with
Hmm.
O365. It'll tell you whether that account exists. And we're going to start doing password sprays. Now, often when we're doing this, though, we're doing it during business hours, and these employees are likely in the office, logged in, doing work. So now
Hmm.
I'm just wondering if there's a potential way to capture some of that stuff. To basically, I'm fighting against myself here, like going after the things that we do. But based on what you said there, I'm just curious if because it seems like that should be something that
Yeah.
you'd be able to flag. Like, hey, they're already logged in. Why are they trying to log in from outside? Like, that doesn't make any sense.
Yeah, I mean, I won't speak for every vendor, but I will say it's 2025. Most vendors that I've interacted with have brute force attack alerts, password spray alerts, scanning alerts, like all those things that are very, very noisy and obvious from various perspectives, especially on like the logging side,
Hmm.
right? You're going to see a lot of failed authentication logs, ideally, in like, depending on what you're spraying. Like if you're spraying Active Directory, one, you're going to see a whole bunch of LDAP and Kerberos on the network. That's going to flag on
Sure.
the NDR side. But then from a logging side, you're going to say, wow, Jimmy has 7,000 failed login attempts and then one successful. There's no way he fat fingered 7,000 times,
Right.
right? In the span of 3 seconds.
Right. No,
Uh,
that's what blows me away is because we'll do that
yeah,
constantly. We're doing password sprays all the time. And like I said before, 90% of the time there's no alert. So it's
yeah.
not that it's not happening, that it's not getting
Oh, yeah.
flagged, but it's just either I mean, it's like
You have to watch it
right.
like you have to
Yeah.
look for it from a hunting perspective, especially on the network. I run into the problem we brought up earlier, where I'm not an expert in everybody's environment because I don't work in everybody's environment.
Mhm.
But there are things that we can look for hunting that are pretty routine. Things like password sprays are one of them. They're very, very noisy at a network level. So if you're not logging Active Directory, you're not logging all of your authentication, if you are watching the network, you'll see all of that,
Mhm.
right? Even if you can't read it's Jimmy, you will see a whole giant spike of attempts made,
Mhm.
right? And then ideally we correlate those, but the data exists, you have to look for
Interesting. Okay. Yeah, well, that brings me up to something else. So you have all these things happening, and let's say you deployed all these techniques, you've deployed the software, you're gathering all those things, and then it's just like alert city, like
it.
things are just going off. It's like you're watching, like cameras in a mall, and there's 10,000 people, and it's like flagging 9,000 of them as like suspicious folks, and you're
Yep.
looking for the one person that's actually like stealing stuff. But like, hey, that one, they're wearing a hoodie, they look nervous, they're running, like
Hmm.
that's all suspicious. Like, how do you handle something like that?
Man, I'm gonna get whiplash because we're at this end of the spectrum, and now we're at the
I
other
know
end of
it
the
just
spectrum,
made me
right?
think of, you're talking about
Yeah.
getting those alerts and things like,
I like to call that the alert cannon. We
yeah.
call certain vendors an alert cannon often, but really where that starts to go down the realm of it is a conversation around alert fatigue. How many alerts can a single analyst reasonably investigate within a shift,
Hmm.
right? And this is especially true if you don't have like a 3 shift team. If you're not following the sun, we call it the follow the sun model, right? Um, if you aren't investigating 24/7, cool. A lot of small entities aren't. That's where we get back into the staff augmentation conversation. Um, how many alerts is too many alerts for that team to handle? And most of the time, when we have alert fatigue, it's in the tunes of thousands of alerts per day.
Hmm.
Analysts just can't do that. Too many alerts means you get a lot of burnout, And this is actually a huge problem with when you, especially the lower level SOC tiers, when you have the people that are kind of not doing the deep investigations or the response, but the people that are more so just working alerts,
Hmm.
just the reactive side, they tend to have the most burnout. We have so many customers with what we call SOC churn, just rotating out analysts, and that then creates the problem of you're no longer creating senior people to become threat hunters and all that side tangent there. Um, it generally is a combination of working with your partnered vendors to help make sure that their solutions are, one, tuned appropriately from the deployment. Tunings change. You cannot set and forget a solution. Ideally, your vendor should be engaged to offer any form of training and tuning on a relatively routine basis, whether that's quarterly, every 6 months, annually, etc. That cadence needs to exist. A lot of times we've run into incumbent solutions where it was set up 5 years ago. Nobody's touched it since. Nobody knows how it works. All we know is it's generating a lot of alerts, and our team can't use it.
Sure.
Well, then we come in and obviously, sales side of me is like, we can solve that problem right now. But in reality, to prevent that problem from happening again, you need to have a process in place of working with your vendors, and not just have the vendor do it for you. Have the vendor teach you how to do it. Show them your methodology for tuning. It goes like the old philosophy of don't give someone a fish, teach them to fish.
Hmm.
Ideally, your vendors that you're trusting to help you defend yourself are working with you so that you can make that alert volume manageable. Some other things, like with Corelight, we've been playing a lot with, well, how do we tackle the alert fatigue from a technical perspective?
Hmm.
And one of the ways we found to do that is grouping alerts. If we see the same alert, password spring is a great example, right? You send 10,000, or if you use like a dictionary attack, right? You're upwards thousands of requests per account. All right, if the threshold's low and say it's 1,000 or 500, you now have like hundreds of alerts for that one account. If you attacked 100 accounts, you have thousands of alerts, right? And those build up. Where one of the things we learned is, hey, if we see the same alert in the same entity, we like to call certain artifacts entities.
Hmm.
Generally, it's the unique artifact that you can look at across the data set. So like a username, IP address, host name, domain, etc. That unique artifact. We can say, hey, this same alert is fired 100 times. Maybe we should give the person one alert to look at instead of 100.
Hmm.
They're going to look at the same thing. They can get all the information if they want, but they're going to start with looking at 100. So we've found that to be a good way to start tackling alert fatigue. Of, instead of just throwing all the alerts in general, why don't we try categorizing and grouping these alerts for the individual so they click once instead of 100.
Hmm.
So the password spring came to mind for that, since we just talked about it. But that's, I would say, to kind of backtrack, your approaches there are work with your vendors, have them actually teach you how to fish, and then see if your vendors offer any form of configuration or anything that technically assist with the alert fatigue as well.
It seems like they could also work with folks like us when we're doing, I get, it really gets into purple teaming, right? If you get somebody that's doing pen testing, it's like, hey, we're going to do these different techniques. Maybe certain things are starting to fire off a ton of alerts, like, hey, if we do a vuln scan, or if we do like an Nmap scan or something like that, it could create these types of alerts that they haven't seen, and all of a sudden they're just getting overwhelmed with things.
That brings us to two tangents. One, tabletop exercises is exactly where that comes to play.
Shout out to Paul Marco. I don't know which camera, one of those cameras.
We'll point at all the cameras.
Tabletop exercises, tell us security.
Tabletops are fantastic for that, right? But the important thing for tabletops is, don't do tabletops in a silo. It's not Dungeons and Dragons with your buddies in a basement. It's a business thing, right?
It's not always in a basement.
Okay, attics. I don't know if I've played D&D in a normal space.
Fair enough.
That's a different question. Anyways, tabletops should be conducted with various teams throughout the organization. Legal should be involved. Marketing should be involved. Like, when you simulate a threat impacting the business, you should also incorporate, like, hey, how does this threat impact your portion of the business?
Mm-hmm.
But even more important, include your vendors. If you have an EDR vendor, an NDR vendor, an incident response retainer, an MDR service, bring those people to the table so that when you simulate something that impacts them, you can see, hey, did you see that? No, you didn't see it. Why didn't you see it? What do we need to look at? Oh, you did see it. Great. Let's add that to the playbook. All right.
Okay. Yeah.
So that's, I forgot the second tangent actually. So that's the one tangent we're going down.
Maybe we'll get to the other one.
We'll find it. Yeah.
That makes me think. Now I gotta have Paul back and talk to him about that, because we didn't even get into. We talked about like having all the different folks that had stakes in the company itself. You know, legal, marketing, whatever.
Yeah.
But we didn't talk about like if you're outsourcing some of that stuff, like having them at the table with some of this to help you address these potential concerns, because like as we talked about with that episode, once that stuff once shit hits the fan, if you haven't done like a tabletop and you start getting attacked, it's just gonna be like you don't know what to do.
Mm-hmm.
How do we? What is the first step that we're gonna take? Right? How do we deal with it with a potential incident?
That kind of goes back to that news station story you and I talked about previously at lunch, right? I can't remember if we talked about it here or not. If not, then I'll go down that route of a news company somewhat local to us here was breached with ransomware a few years ago, and also had a team to go do incident response for that. If they happen to watch this episode, I apologize in advance to them because it's a sad day. But probably stirred some memories. But anyways, this company was just decimated with ransomware. And they called us, we gathered a team, we went on site, and we were like, all right, what have you guys done to mitigate so far? And we got like deer in the headlights.
Mhm.
They're like, what are you talking about? That's why you're here. And we're like, is the ransomware going? And it's like, an hour, 2 hours by the time we rally everybody, figure out who we're sending to staff and get there. We have to drive to the place. And we're like, what have you been doing? And they're like, oh, we've just been watching her.
It's like your house is on fire and you're just
Didn't want to find a bucket of water.
yeah, just nothing.
Nothing to help there.
Like, yeah, we'll wait.
So immediately we just start ripping wires out of switches, which, might not have been the most pleasant approach. But when the house is burning, like, you got to do something.
Yeah.
But anyways, I'll skip to the end of that story here shortly. But the gist of that was you should not wait for boots on the ground to initiate your mitigation plan.
Mhm.
There were IT people there. They weren't security, so they didn't do anything. I'm not knocking them. They're really smart people. But there should be a plan in place of, hey, we're getting attacked. Things are hitting the fan. What's our process here? The process might be as simple as start unplugging switches, right? Stop the propagation if it's that type of attack. But more so, like, we should do something. And we shouldn't sit here and twiddle our thumbs until someone tells us what to do.
Mm-hmm.
That just came up in my mind based off of what you said.
No, that's a great story. Just understanding not only the value of potential tabletop exercise and those types of things, but just how some of those other solutions will help maybe not even get to that spot in the first place.
And in hindsight, actually, with that particular story, they would have avoided that whole incident had they had a red team engagement that just poked the external network. Because that particular one was started by RDP that was exposed to the internet.
Oh,
they were able to, the attacker was able to RDP into a server sitting in the server rack. One of our good mutual friends, who again I won't name on here, was actually duking it out with the guy on the Windows server. Like, he was hands on keyboard trying to kick this dude out. It was, I'm sure if he watches this, he'll remember what I'm talking about.
I'm gonna have to reach out now, and we'll have to get some of that part of the story.
But had they had an external assessment that said, hey, your RDP is exposed to the internet, they might have said, oh, that might not be good, because you would have said, hey, that's not good.
Oh, it's an immediate finding for me. Anything like that. Yeah.
And then on the defensive side, we could have said, oh, well, if you need it open to the internet, which you shouldn't do, we are recommending against this. But if you have to have it, you should monitor it. And this is what you need to monitor it. So if someone kicks open that door, you can be alerted before it starts propagating through a network, right? That's probably a good closure to the tabletop. Please invite people.
Sure. To get into something a little bit more for the customers that we usually try and target, the small to medium size. You always hear about like, hey, this is the latest and greatest. It only costs a few $100,000, just a small investment.
Just a bit, yeah.
If you're Fortune 100, no problem. If you're, a smaller organization, that's not really, that's not really feasible. It's like, companies think that they need that top of the line thing, 24/7
Hmm.
SOC, the best security stack. And then, there's no tuning. There's no actual configuration coordination, anything like that. So what should these smaller companies like do and think about? Just we're not looking for 100%. We're looking for let's get 90%
Yeah,
there,
sure.
like from
So
the defensive side.
yeah, I mean, if budget is the concern, right? We'll say money's the problem, but you have
Always.
really good like technical resources. You have really smart people that can build things, but you don't have the money to give them the tools that they want. Maybe approach the open source community. So like,
Mm,
I like to brag about Corelight here. We call ourselves the custodian of Zeek. Zeek is a tool that was formerly called Bro. It's a network monitoring solution, right? Bro has been around since the late 90s, renamed to Zeek, I don't know, like a decade ago. I can get into specifics. Someone from Corelight watching this will probably scold me later. Um, but like Zeek is an open source solution. You can deploy today as long as you find a way to feed it traffic, which span ports are free. Every organization with a network today has a switch, and I think every modern switch today has the ability to create a span,
hmm
right? You could create a box using free open source Zeek, still get close. It's like that 90% of enterprise visibility, so long as you scale it out and
You have it
send it the
positioned in
information.
the right spot, right? So
Correct.
it's
Yeah.
able to capture the
Yeah, it's
relevant traffic.
not as easy as plug in, turn on button, eat
Mm,
traffic, but from a high level perspective, like that's one option for network security monitoring. Um, excuse me. A lot of companies today pay for Microsoft licensing, right? That includes a whole slew of security things that it didn't a decade ago.
yeah,
Um,
it's gotten so much
mhm.
better just across the board.
Yep.
Uh, so that like it even makes my job difficult now when I'm trying to install some of my
Yep.
security tools and Windows is like, no, you can't have that. That's offensive. Like
Yeah.
that's malicious. It's like, well, that's the point. Like I
Yeah.
need to fire this against somebody.
Yeah. I mean, Defender's right there,
Yeah.
right? You don't have to go do a giant RFP to an EDR vendor. In those cases, maybe Defender is giving you what you want.
hmm
Same with a SIM, right? There's a whole bunch of smaller scale SIMs out there that maybe aren't on the news as much because they don't have the marketing share that other massive vendors with high renewal
hmm
rates have. But you can start to deploy that SOC Triad to build out that monitoring and that data ingest without having to pay a few $100,000.
hmm
And then when you get to the point where, again, that only works if you have the technical resources to do it, right? If budget's the problem and you have technical resources, that's the approach I would take. But then eventually the company grows and you want to make these guys' life easier, then maybe that's when you start to explore the enterprise side of those open source solutions, right? So like in our case, Corelight being the enterprise side of Zeek.
So that's when, in the initial configuration you're talking about, like they're basically handling the
Yep.
issues. They're trying to figure out how to wade through the
Yeah.
configurations, the tuning, that sort of thing,
Sure.
which is all just completely available. And then you're
Hmm.
saying, oh, now we need some more outside help, and then
Yeah.
they pay for the. And I think there's a lot more companies that are doing that now. They're
Yeah.
offering the basic product or whatever, free open source, do it, and then if you need more help, then you can actually come and pay us for that.
Yeah, I mean, Elastic's another really good example of that. They created the Elk stack, right?
Mm,
Elastic, Logstash, and Kibana. 10 years ago with SANS courses and stuff, how many courses had revamped versions of Elk stacks
mm,
to get through those labs and whatnot? And you can still freely deploy Elk today, right? It's the same concept. Elastic has, hey, we'll support the community with our open source version, but when you're ready for enterprise, we have an option for you, right? And a lot of companies are starting to take that approach, I think.
and I think it's super helpful for businesses just across the board because I mean, for me, the biggest thing I always hear is budget, right?
Hmm.
We either don't have the personnel that can manage some of this, which is a different problem. I guess in that case, you're going to want to look at uh, like outside uh, vendors or services that can implement some of that for you until you can do it.
Yep.
So yeah, I guess that makes sense. If you have the technical know-how, do that in house, and that's going
Hmm.
to be really helpful just longer term
it's a different cost.
Yeah, it's a different cost, and they're going to be somebody that's dedicated and focused
Mm-hmm.
to the organization. They understand it a lot more intimately, but it seems like you're risking a little bit more central point of failure if that person leaves or if they can't, they can't work 24/7. So there's obviously some give and take, but it seems like a good solution
Yeah,
for a lot of
it's
them.
where that solution starts to crumble a little bit is longer term. Like you have somebody that's built this Frankenstein of open source tools that are all interconnected. That person gets hit by a bus, leaves the company,
Yeah,
whatever. You now are left with a Frankenstein solution of how do I operate this
yeah,
thing? And on the enterprise side, generally that's when we start to see people convert quite a bit, at least in those smaller shops, right?
hmm
Where they've had this thing for a while, it's worked, but now they need resources freed up and they have budget to do so. That's when we see that conversion. But if you're not there yet, we see lots of open source shops today.
nice. And I guess from my side it'd be so that's like the defensive side, right?
Mm-hmm.
You're implementing
Yeah.
some stuff that's pretty good, and then looking for some of those smaller security firms that I mean, there's tons of them across the country that are relatively local, where they can help you evaluate that and work with you a lot more intimately to
Mm-hmm.
find out like, hey, is the stuff that you now have set up, is it working as well as it could? Is there some places where it could be improved? Gets you, well, I guess, more comfortable on where your security stands,
Yep.
so you're not really caught quite as off guard
Yeah. And then
when something happens.
that kind of goes back to kind of how we started this session today of I'm Mr. Pentester. Here's a report. Do you have tools to defend yourself today? Oh yeah, but I'm not really using them. Or they don't necessarily understand where that data is going to come from for the thing you identified, right? So that might be a really good approach from the red team side to do some knowledge transfer on, hey, we popped X, we got domain admin doing this. If you collected these logs, you would see that in the future. If you monitored this traffic, you could see that in the future,
Mm,
right? Are you monitoring these things today? And if the answer is no to any of that, then if they don't, again, this kind of goes back to like the open source bit, maybe there's some recommendations there of, well, what if you worked on deploying X and in 6 months we'll reevaluate? Like something like that.
I'm gonna have to sit down with you and just like go over some of these attack chains that we normally do, just to find out where those monitoring or
Sure.
flagging things are gonna catch up, because that'll just help us make better recommendations for things. Not like, hey, get NDR. Like,
Yeah.
obviously that's a shitty suggestion, just
I mean,
anyway.
I love that suggestion.
Well,
I'm
it's
an
it's a
NDR
great
vendor.
it's a great suggestion, but it's so vague for a company. It's just like, okay, like, thanks, but it's just like, oh, it's get NDR because
Yeah, exactly.
these types of things
Yeah.
are being missed, obviously, or you just don't have any insight there. So, that's what helps, and that's why I always love sitting down and talk to you, because I understand your side of your side of that wall, I guess, on what's happening with companies, how you're trying to catch us, helps me evade you better, right? It's trying to find new techniques, new processes, that sort of thing. But also just what's going to be best for the customers.
Yeah.
So
My favorite customer engagements are the ones where they call or we sit down on site at their headquarters and they say, hey, we got this red team report. Would you mind helping us like look it over and see if it's things that your solution could help with? Or, hey, we didn't flag a lot with your solution. Can you help us maybe figure out why? Those are the best relationships. It does a couple of things. One, my core job as a sales engineer is to become a trusted advisor.
mhm,
That means you, Mr. Customer, trust me in talking about these things with you, right? That I'm going to have a frank conversation and try to lead you down the path that's best for you. So one, that's just great for relationship building that when you're at that point.
mhm,
But two, from a technical perspective, that means you are owning up to the fact that you have invested in your security and you want to make the best use of that spend, right? It doesn't cost Corelight anything extra to have a conversation about red team, right?
mhm.
I'm not going to make money because you said, "Hey Cody, there's a red team report here. Will you help me with it?" It could lead to, oh, you need visibility here to see that, right? That's a different conversation we could go down, or it could be as simple as, oh, well, this detection, we didn't configure it to do it because it wasn't a concern when we deployed. Maybe we should turn that on if it's a concern now,
Hmm.
right? And you can have those conversations with your vendors to really grow security organically,
Hmm.
um, without it having to be, oh, there's sales, or we don't want to talk to the vendor. We want to do everything in house. Like, we shouldn't be afraid to talk to the resources we've invested in.
Yeah, no, I think that's a great point. Um, so we're getting close to having to wrap up here. One thing I wanted to ask is,
Mhm.
do you have any events, anything like that you have coming up? I don't know when this is going to go out, so maybe in the next couple months worth of things.
Let's see. Supercomputer conference in St. Louis is coming up in November.
Okay.
In the middle of that, there's something called the ACI Rodeo that's put on by a few of our airlines, I believe. I don't know if I can say that out loud, actually. Never mind. ACI Rodeo is coming up in Houston in November. That's an airline-specific conference.
Okay.
But other than that, I won't be there. But I know like Black Hat Europe's coming up. This is kind of getting towards the time of year where we go into that void
Yeah.
of Thanksgiving to New Year's as nobody's around. Coming up into the new year, though, there will certainly be some conferences. RSA conference is coming right up in March. It's actually like 2 months early this year.
Is it in March? Oh.
Yeah, kind of bizarre. It's gonna be cold, but I'll definitely be there.
Yeah, it was May this past year or this year, right?
Correct, yeah.
Okay. I think we're getting an invite, or we have one of the sponsors from Red Team Village is asked us to maybe work with them to do some sort of event at our RSA. So I might be out there again.
Well, if you want to do something fun, let me know.
I know.
I'm
That's
there
what I'm
every year.
thinking. Right. No, it was a blast last year. And they had a few of the other villages, but not RTV. So, maybe we'll see where it goes. So Cody, principal sales engineer, Corelight, and bookshop owner.
Also, bookshop owner. Yeah.
For what it's worth. Appreciate it. Thanks for coming on.
Yeah, likewise.
And yeah, I appreciate the conversation. And next time we'll just keep recording when we're at lunch. And
Yeah, it's not. I'll wear those glasses
We'll just do
where I
the
can record it.
yeah, your meta glasses,
Yeah.
right?